Okay, we are going to do the fourth installment of the second Florida adventures. We left last time, Steve, really right in November. So why don't you pick it up from there? Where is Second Florida Infantry located as we speak?
Okay, just to bring you up to date, they're still at Ship's Point right now. What's been going on down there is, like I mentioned last month, Magruder keeps getting all these reports about invasion. The Federals are going to attack. He's constantly communicating with the War Department wanting more troops. A lot of this during this time that involves the Second Florida also is they're with their pickets out front, and we mentioned on the map about the no man's land that's out there. The Federals are going to come up and try and nose around a little bit. They're also trying to get forage and that. The Confederates are doing the same thing. And there's constant reports from the Confederate forces are down there that once in a while they capture one or two Federals. And as Magruder interrogates them, this is where he gets more scared about, he's hearing stories from these, some of them are deserters, some of them are just plain captured on patrol. But from that, he's constantly being worried about being attacked. And in doing that, he's shifting people around, different regiments, different places. This or other ones. It didn't involve the Second Florida at this time. But you can imagine that during this time that the Second Florida, when they're in a camp like that, in addition to everything else, is if a picket discharges their musket, they're going to, drum to arms and have alerts, stand by, and then they'll stand down to react to all these little different ones that come up. It could be nothing more than a deer running through the woods and a scared picket discharging his musket. That's why some units didn't issue ammunition to the soldiers in camp. You just gave it to them while they're on picket duty and then took it back when they're not on picket duty. Okay, what I'm going to do here is I have made up it includes the Second Florida. It is from letters from this Eugene Likes, who was with the Second Florida, from his letters home. It's a little bit of what was it about life of Johnny Reb and several other sources and the official records. And what I'm going to be doing is just reading down this, and Cindy will scroll through the slides to reinforce what I'm talking about. And this is life, camp life in 1861, which would be on the peninsula down there with the Second Florida. Okay. The Second Florida had its longest period of inactivity in the Yorktown defenses. Despite regular drill practice, the men had much free time. One Confederate soldier appropriately remarked that none can imagine who has never experienced a soldier's life and the listlessness of mind, tediousness of time, as we resume day after day the monotonous duties devolved upon. Now, as I'm going through this, just remember, take a look at a weekend when we're at Dade City, Ocala, Olustee, any of these. Just kind of visualize that. The men of the Second Florida in 1861 had to find ways to which to relieve their boredom, and find it they did. The members of the regiment used most of their free time in the procurement, preparation, and consumption of food. The troops in Virginia in 1861 were well fed for a time. For the first several months of the war, the Confederate government was able to supply troops with more or less the same capacity that the United States government. Once the Second Florida took its place in the defenses around Yorktown, they received enough supplies to live substantially well. Sutlers were commissary merchants who brought wagon loads of supplies of all sorts, such as food, clothing, cooking utensils, et cetera, et cetera. They were a common sight early during the conflict. They brought their wares into or close to the camps, and the soldiers would purchase items from them. Now, take into consideration down the peninsula, there's no fighting going on down there. So the sutlers could come from Richmond down there and get as close as they could to the encampment.
Steve, pardon me for interrupting you. May I ask about something or point something out, please?
Go ahead.
Clay, do you see how shiny that cup is?
I was thinking that, yeah. What are you
Just-
saying?
I don't know, just wondering.
They just got it from the sutlers.
Yeah, okay.
You know,
All right.
Chap, it's funny you said it. I was thinking the same thing when he put that picture up.
I just didn't want to lose the picture before I commented. So anyway, I'll be quiet now, Steve.
Hey, while we're here, I'm noticing the baggy fit of those trousers on everybody looks pretty authentic. I mean, anybody who's thinking about getting fitted trousers, look at this picture and see what reality was, right?
Yeah, it's a great picture.
Look at how thin they are.
Yep, and young.
No, I'm not looking at how thin they are, Cindy. Thank you very much.
Now that was
I'll
like
bring
a
up
federal
before
picture, though. Is
before I
it-
go back to reading, I'll bring up one thing about clothing. They didn't really have uniforms. The government was not issuing clothing at this time. They had to buy it themselves, but when they started issuing, there was one size fit all. So if you were a tall guy, you might have high water pants. If you were a short guy, you had to roll them up. Or what they did is they would issue them out to a company and say, deal with it. So a tall guy would have to swap out his pants for somebody else, you know, how they fit each other. Okay, I'm going to go on with the reading. During the first winter of the war, Eugene Leaks wrote that the prices of the sutlers were very fair and that sometimes they could purchase fresh pork. A source of chronic irritation to officers and men was the frequent overcharging for food and other stocks if the sutlers could get away with it. So long as the government still had the capacity to pay the soldiers on a regular or semi-regular basis, sutlers continued to flock about rebel camps. Meat and meal were staples of the rebel diet. Of all kinds of meal, cornmeal was the most common in the Confederacy. However, the meal was of very poor quality. Beef was the more common of the kinds of meat consumed, though bacon was a very close second. In the official records tell about there was quite a few herds of cattle up around the Richmond area that, at this time. They were being driven in and also hogs. There were several methods of preparing meal or flour. During this period, when the men had plenty of skillets, they often made biscuits or cornbread. Meat was generally prepared in one of three ways. The method of broiling a piece of beef, pork, or other meat by impaling it upon a ramrod and placing it over a fire was so common it was termed a standard. Sometimes meat was made into a pie or a soup or stew, depending on the availability of flour and or vegetables. Bacon was deep fried in a skillet so that the remaining fat could be used as a softening or used to make what they called a slush. It's a kind of a gravy concoction with water, meal, and bacon grease into which the men dip their biscuits. The greatest food-related health problem during this period was not the availability of food, but rather the food preparation techniques used by Confederate soldiers. As time lapsed and the Confederate government could not supply the necessary supplies, theft and plunder were most common where the civilian population was concerned. General Magruder put out orders because he got so mad that as these regiments were coming down to the peninsula, they, instead of requisitioning and getting supplies from the civilian population, regiments would, individual soldiers just steal them. And he put out very harsh terms that if you go into the official records and read what he did right there, he was going to be nasty. The punishment was going to be very bad with the soldiers. Okay. Newspaper and Army medical reports attributed the large proportion of the cases of sickness to improper preparation of food by volunteers. The soldiers' culinary skills never really improved. Members of the regiment either got used to the diet or got sick. With the frequent shortages of fresh fruits and vegetables, living on half rancid meat and deep fried wheat flour or cornmeal bread most certainly sent more men to the hospital or to the grave than did Yankee bullets by the end of the war. Irregularity was a major problem among troops in Virginia throughout the war. To stay healthy, members of the 2nd Florida had to supplement their diet with non-ration items. Within the 2nd Florida, foraging for supplies would have been almost unheard of for much of the first year, though fishing along streams and other means of hunting wild game did supplement their diet while stationed near Yorktown. Florida's many waterways and inherent ties to the sea made most Floridians adept fishermen. Parcels containing food sent by family members back home did help to supplement the diet of the members of the regiment in 1861. Because the unit was not moving that much. They stayed down on the peninsula. Letters from members of other units stationed in Virginia indicate that early in the war, packages of home were received on a regular basis. One other thing I'll bring up real quick, because I know Logan mentioned this, I don't know if it was an email or what it was about deer. There's wildlife down there, but you got to remember there was like 10,000 or more soldiers down in that area. So if they shot wildlife that was out there, there's a very good chance with all the noise that the regiments were making and everybody, some regiments that did have ammunition that they didn't control it, the wildlife didn't last very long. They would get scarce. Without a doubt, the most common activity in which the men engaged during their free time was making conversation or singing with other members of their regiment or with men of other units. When the men gathered to cook and eat meals, they were apt to shoot the breeze. And nighttime informal groups formed around campfires. There they would talk, tell jokes, and sing. Aside from singing alone, the men brought musical instruments with them and played for the men around the campfires, either as accompaniment for vocal songs or playing instrumental tunes. Banjos, fiddles, flutes, and harmonicas and spoons were the favorites. These instruments were easy to carry and were not difficult to obtain, as opposed to brass instruments, which became scarce early in the war. Those men who did not sing talked. Group discussions called bull sessions included various topics. Including in most discussions was the use of colorful language. One rebel soldier in a letter to his wife wrote that one of my greatest annoyances is my proximity to a tent of the company next to me, in which are 9 or 10 of the most vile, obscene blackguards that could be raked up. There is the dirtiest talk I have ever heard in my life. Another soldier in a letter to his wife wrote, oaths, blasphemies, imprecautions, obscenities are hourly heard ringing in our ears until your mind is almost filled with them. The men of the 2nd Florida who could read such to catch up on the latest news and read whatever else they could get their hands. I mean, even when I came home leave one time, my dad told me about how filthy my language was being in the Army and corrected me at home. Okay.
Steve,
Newspapers.
might I add too, that was one of the 3 vices that the chaplains preached against, was the cursing and such as well, along with drinking and gambling.
Well, we're going to get to those here in a minute too. So I'm glad that's a good lead in.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
No, that's quite all right. Well, let me go on. The newspapers provided a major source of information, and it was uncommon to see men in the regiment reading newspapers printed in places other than Florida, even including northern newspapers. When a soldier received a newspaper, there was always a group of men eagerly waiting for him to finish reading it so that the prized item could be passed around to the next person. It was during their months on the James Peninsula that the 2nd Florida got its first taste of what would come to be one of their greatest influences during the war, religion. Many of the men who went off to fight in the Civil War were wont to lead their lives abiding by the Christian ideals of that movement. Even so, many members of the regiment found religion while serving in Virginia. Revival meetings started to take place in the military camps located in Virginia within the first 6 months of the war. During these months of inactivity, chaplains and revivalists were able to reach some people. However, there were many they did not reach. Some Christians, soldiers in 1861, when many miles from family and church community, were tempted by the evils of an army camp. Early in the conflict, before the men understood the horror of war, most found greater delight in secular activities. In 1861, some regimental chaplains returned home frustrated by the vices the men were partaking of. This included sports and sit-down games, such as checkers, which was very popular. Card games were very popular also, including poker, euchre, 21, and other games of any kind of a chance. Gambling and drinking were among the biggest occupations. They would bet on anything, and if they didn't have the money, any item which they possessed would be used as a wager. They would bet on such things as cockroach races, louse races, cockfights, even fist fights. When you're bored, they would even bet on when the sun was going to come up. Liquor was forbidden for the enlisted, but was never fully stopped. The men were very resourceful in getting liquor, either making it with stills or having it provided by sutlers and civilians. Soldiers would forego food or trade their accoutrements to get liquor, probably the start of the pawn system with sutlers on that. Lastly, and usually unmentioned vice that followed an army was prostitution, especially at the beginning of the war in early 1861 or the fall 61. Although reportedly low, venereal diseases were encountered by regimental surgeons. Most regiments at this time reported between 10 to 15% infections. Camp followers were a constant problem at this time. So you can see that a lot of these things I described to you, I'm not going to say, but it's kind of funny, you know, we do the songs, we sing along, we have instruments at the reenactments. So you can pick anything along there that I just read about as how you have seen it at a weekend of reenacting. Okay?
Good stuff, Steve.